Hello young illustrators and designers, my name is Robert Young. Today I'm going to be talking to you about creating illustrations from conception to final image. It doesn't have to just be illustrations. This works for graphic design, fine art, anything really where your final image has a clear intention from the beginning. Sometimes when you're making images, the process and exploration or a sort of stream of consciousness approach can be part of the concept of the final image. But in general, if you are trying to achieve some sort of goal, some sort of visual problem that you're solving, whether that's something that you've invented or you've been given by a client or an instructor, this is what I've found to work pretty well. You can definitely find working artists out there in the wild that don't do some of these or do some of them differently. This is how I teach it. Take it, try it out and adapt it. But I think that this is fairly standard stuff here. So the first few parts are going to be kind of happening maybe all at the same time. But somewhere towards the very, very, very beginning, you need to do research. If you are trying to solve a problem, let's say an editorial portrait of Barack Obama, and let's say that you have you've read every book about Barack Obama and you're Barack Obama's biggest fan, you still only have your perspective and your own personal viewpoint that you can view Barack Obama through. Now let's also say that this editorial article is not about a vague, broad sense of Barack Obama. Let's say that it's about one specific policy and its effects. You then need to know everything about that policy that you could possibly find out within the time given. So if this is an editorial assignment for an editorial client, you may only have a few hours, a few days, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks at the very most. So you have a set window of time that you're going to be able to do research. But within that time, you need to become basically a mini expert on whatever it is going on in the problem that you're trying to solve. So the first thing you're going to want to do is to narrow your topic. Again, going back to Barack Obama as an example, it's really way too wide of a topic. Are we talking about his youth in Chicago, or pre-president, presidential term, post-presidential term? Are we talking about one specific policy? What exactly is it that we are trying to convey? So narrow your topic. Often if you're doing this work for a client, say an editorial article, then that topic has been probably pretty narrowed for you. Then you're going to take that narrowed topic, you're going to find articles, books, magazines, documentaries, podcasts, even sometimes interviewing people who are more knowledgeable about something than you. Find people with different viewpoints. If you have, your demographic markers, let's say for me, white male, cis, straight, middle class, educated person, there are going to be very defined limits on what sort of perspective I can have on this, or things that I may not consider because they haven't affected me in the same way that they might have affected somebody else. So if you're doing this illustration, you are going to do a better job the more information you have, the more different viewpoints you have to access. So talk to people, read things, compile that information, and then evaluate your sources. One of the great things about the internet is that it has really made it so that people all over the world can post content, they can create things, talk about anything they want with a potential audience of millions and millions of people. One of the downsides of the internet is that there's no sort of vetting or curation. Anybody can go on the internet and say whatever they want, and sometimes that information isn't accurate. Sometimes that's on purpose. People can go on the internet and lie. So evaluate your sources. The same thing if you were doing a term paper or anything else. Make sure that the information that you're getting, the research that you're doing, is as accurate as it can be. The next part of this is going to be compiling photographic reference. So here in this example we see an illustration by American illustrator Norman Rockwell. It seems, you know, pretty simple. It's just two groups of figures in front of a moving truck with a little bit of a glimpse of a neighborhood behind it. Norman Rockwell, according to the Norman Rockwell Museum, took more than 50,000 photos for reference in his career. So, you know, everything that you are depicting, regardless of how realistically you intend to depict it, you should have photo reference for. The vast majority of illustrators and artists in general are not pulling these sort of things out of their head and just drawing figures out of nowhere. There are a few people, kind of outliers, or people with, you know, very specific gifts, but that's not really common. That's not something that you can even work towards. So for everything in your image, you should have photographic reference. The best photographic reference is reference that you're taking yourself. So, you know, if you can get some friends together and have them pose and take pictures of them, then you can control to a greater degree the lighting, the background, the costuming, all of those sorts of things. So you can see in the photos that Norman Rockwell took that the models are not only posed and lit the way that he needs them, but they're also clothed the way that he needs them. It's much harder when you are using internet sources to gather your photo reference of models to put clothes on a nude model or to change the clothes that they're wearing. So this is incredibly difficult. Now, you don't always have time or access to take photographic reference of models. So the second best thing to do is to go to the internet and find pictures of people that you can use. In either case, finding actors I find to be the best. People that emote with their bodies and their face. I've used myself and my friends for photo reference before. We're not really very good at it. I'm not a very expressive person physically, so photo reference that I take of myself is, you know, it feels kind of stiff. I'm not a good actor. And you may have noticed doing models from live figures that some people seem to have kind of more interesting poses. They're able to convey more with their body, and then some people seem kind of stiff and wooden, and that's just, you know, different people are good at different things. One of the things that I like to do is if I can think of a famous actor that would kind of fit roughly what I'm trying to do, they're nice because you can find tons of film of them moving, pictures of them from all different angles, that sort of thing. So sometimes I'll, if I'm creating a character, I'll have, you know, kind of an idea of a mishmash of a couple different famous actors, and then I can find those images and put them together online. That's the thing that I do. Try it out, see how it works. So here's another example. This is from James Bama for a cover for a Doc Savage book, and you can see that, you know, you're not taking that great of a leap from the photo reference to the final painting. The model is lit, costumed, posed pretty identically to the final painting. And then you come in and you make some stylistic choices. You make some, some major color choices, things like that. But the idea is to work smarter, not harder. You don't want to be trying to solve problems in your final image that could have been solved by doing reference and research early on. So brainstorming. This is another thing that, it might happen at the same time as gathering your research and photo reference, but it should happen towards the beginning. Really any brainstorming strategy that you've ever seen, maybe, you did this in English classes in high school or something, maybe you've worked in an office and they did this as part of team building or problem solving, they all kind of work the same way. So make a list of words associated with your topic, write down everything that comes to mind, whether it's obviously related or not. This sort of stream of consciousness, just letting your brain open up and just kind of spill stuff out. Don't try to curate these ideas. Don't try to curate your initial sketches. It's okay to come up with bad ideas and write them down in your notebook. It's okay to draw a bad sketch. That's the time to do this sort of work. If it's not good, then it's just a sketch. You don't have to worry about it. But if you're in your head trying to, only draw the best sketches and only write down the best ideas, then you're really spending a lot of energy curating that you don't need to. Sometimes you'll write things down and you think it's a terrible idea, and then it'll kind of lead you to a better idea. Or sometimes something doesn't seem like a good idea at the time, and then months later you look back at your sketchbook and you get a new idea from that bad idea. So just, let it come out. Don't try to gatekeep it. You can use these lists to create charts and graphs to visualize the information in useful ways. You've probably seen, something where you write a word down in a circle and then you've got different circles branching out from that. One thing that I like to do is kind of make a grid, so I'll have the same words on the left and on the top of the grid, and then as they come down diagonally and meet, they make new combinations of words that maybe I wouldn't have thought of otherwise. Make note of, things that you are writing down that you think may be good ideas. Sometimes I'll just circle them, or I'll make a little check mark or a star next to them, some sort of shorthand that you can do really quickly. And then once you've done a lot of brainstorming, evaluate which ideas are good and which ways you think are going to solve the problem in interesting ways, and then kind of move forward from there. So sketch studies. When I refer to sketch studies, I mean sketches that are done to try to figure out how to depict different things. It's not quite the same thing as a thumbnail or a sketch composition. Here is an example from French painter Theodore Géricault for a painting called Raft of the Medusa. So in this, it's not really composed. It seems to be in this image because it's been cropped down into a rectangle, but this was really just a bunch of sketches on a piece of paper. And he's trying to figure out how to render the form of the arm and the shoulder of the body, different poses, stuff like that. Trying to just, figure out the object and how to depict it. Here's another one from the same painting. Again, not composed, maybe not even fully finished. Just how do I draw this leg? How do I draw this hand? This is definitely not something that you're going to want to try to figure out as you're working on the final drawing for the final image. Here's some more, just a little bit of working with directional lighting, cast shadow, trying to figure out again the forms. Same studies for Raft of the Medusa. And another one, a little bit of costuming going on in here. So this is what sketch studies should look like. How do I draw this thing? One thing that Jericho did that you're probably not going to be able to do is that he set up his studio for this painting across the street from a morgue. And he went over to the morgue and he was able to get body parts from human cadavers. So this painting, Raft of the Medusa, was about a shipwreck and these people that were kind of left to try to survive on a raft in the ocean until, you know, some of them were rescued. But in that time, many of them died. It was a horrible thing. There were even reports of resorting to cannibalism to survive. So Jericho knew that he was going to have to paint and render human flesh, and human flesh in some sort of decay. So this isn't really a thing that you can do anymore. Hundreds of years ago, I guess you could just go over to a morgue and ask for body parts and they would give you body parts, including heads. But you know, if this is something that you're trying to do now, a realistic rendering, you are going to have to find, you know, some sort of way to do sketch studies of what you need. So getting away from the gruesome for a little bit, this is just some sketch studies from Sam Bosma. And you can see that the sketch studies and little thumbnail compositions are kind of happening at the same time. So that's okay too. Going into compositional sketches. So the big thing with compositional sketches, and the reason that they're different from sketch studies, is that compositional sketches are composed. They're taking into account the composition of the image, the boundaries with which the final image will exist in, and this, you know, it doesn't matter if it's an image that's full bleed or if it's a spot illustration. Spot illustrations exist in relation to something else. You know, maybe they are next to a newspaper article, maybe they're inside of a book page. There is still a boundary to which it needs to exist that you need to take into consideration when you design it. So here are some compositional sketches from illustrator Daniel Fishel. I really like following him on Instagram because when he posts final images that he does for clients, he also posts the kind of last stage of sketches, sketch options that he sent to his art director. So it's really cool seeing, you know, the different ways that he tried to solve the problem, and then what the art director, the client, went with, and then the final result. So these next few are all from the same job, and then I'll show you the final illustration when we get to the section on final art. But you can see there's kind of the same idea, but completely different compositions. So that's really important. If you're doing 10 sketch compositions and they're all exactly the same, but you know, your main figure has a different type of shirt collar, that's fine, but it's not really addressing different ways of solving the problem or different ways of composing the image. And that's really the benefit of sketch compositions. Again, this is the place where you're going to want to solve compositional issues. Don't try to solve them in the final image. It's really tempting to just go straight from idea to final image, but it doesn't tend to give you the best results. And if you're working with a client, very rarely are they going to allow you to do that. For any job that I've ever done for a client, the expectation is, you know, a minimum of 3 different sketch compositions. So again, all for the same problem that we're solving, and we see that in Daniel's images. Here's some sketch compositions for Raft of the Medusa. You know, don't try to like make your sketch compositions beautiful. They don't need to be rendered to the same degree that you're going to render the final image. If you're working with a client, you know, it's assumed that they've seen your work, your final work, so they have some idea of what the final image will look like, what your rendering looks like, all of that stuff. So for sketch compositions, you know, you can invent a shorthand for everything. these are not full figures. You know, they don't have faces, they don't have hair, they don't have clothes. They're just kind of, this is where the bodies will be, this is where the sail will be, this is where the horizon line will be. These are how, you know, my shapes are composed. So, you know, that can really benefit you. And then you're, you know, not spending days and days on compositional sketches. This should be a pretty fast process. Here's some more sketch compositions from Sam Bosma for a different illustration than the one I showed you earlier. This one, you can see the last one numbered here is 48. I don't know how many he actually did for this, but he's doing tons and tons of different sketch compositions and starting to get into some tonal compositions as well here on the middle and right pages. Those things kind of, you know, these different different segments of creating images kind of blend together at the edges. So you can see how many different ways he, and I think this is, it's either Frodo or Bilbo meeting Gollum from Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, and you can see how many different ways he's tried to arrange this scene and solve this problem. Like, what makes it the most interesting? What kind of story is he trying to tell? Which part of the meeting between these two characters is the problem that he's trying to solve with an image? Here's some more for that other Sam Bosma illustration. You can see some, you know, just figuring out, like, I think where this figure is going to be cut off by a branch, and you can see how small they are. It's, you know, only a few inches, so they don't need to be huge. If you're making, you know, full page or final size sketch compositions, it's going to take you a lot more time. However, one thing that you should always be doing is, when you're making sketch compositions, they need to be sized in relation to the final image. So if your final illustration is supposed to be 10 inches by 14 inches horizontally, then that means you know, a 5-inch by 7-inch sketch composition would be fine. That's, you know, 50% of the size. You could also do a 2.5-inch by 3.5-inch, which is probably what I would do. I like sketching the initial compositions pretty small. You're just kind of using shapes as stand-ins at that point. If it works on that scale, then it'll work at the larger scale. What you don't want to do is have, you know, a client asking you for a final that's 10 inches by 14 inches and giving them compositions in a square, or giving them sketches with no compositional boundary around it. That doesn't really communicate what's going to happen in the end. So you know, it's a waste of your time. Those compositional issues that you've solved in a square are not going to translate into a rectangle. Tonal sketches. So light, value, you know, modeling forms, those can all be great narrative tools. It's something that you're going to want to figure out well before color. You can't fix bad tonal compositions by throwing color on top of it. So Raft of the Medusa, you know, pretty heavy subject matter, also in a time with these, you know, this heavy chiaroscuro, high contrast, you know, really dramatic lights and darks. That was really popular in painting during that time, and it fits this subject matter. So you can see Theodore Géricault's tiny tonal compositions. Here's some more from Sam Bosma for that same Lord of the Rings / The Hobbit illustration that he's working on. Tons and tons of different ways to separate the foreground, middle ground, and background with tone. Figuring out the value structure, even if it's something that's not going to be heavily realistically modeled. Even if you're talking about cartoons, we still have to have a tonal structure that allows the image to be read, that creates a clear visual hierarchy that makes sense, that communicates your story, that allows the image to be legible, bad tonal compositions, and this is something you'll see when people try to fix tonal compositions with just throwing color on top of it, is if you squint, all of the values then become the same, and squinting makes the image non-readable. It just kind of looks like a messy mashup of really similar tones. An image with a good tonal structure you can squint at and it'll still make sense. So that's kind of what you're looking at. If you're working digitally, one thing you can do is throw an adjustment layer over top of all of your files in Illustrator and desaturate that adjustment layer. If you make a hue saturation adjustment layer and take the saturation all the way down, it'll show you a black and white version of all of your colors underneath. That's really helpful because you can turn that layer on and off rather than, you know, going to image mode and changing it to grayscale and changing it back. That's a lot more tedious. So here's Sam Bosma working digitally. Again, working digitally, but refining it a little bit more. This is part tonal structure and part sort of an underdrawing for his painting. So you'll see that a little bit later, but this is Sam Bosma again. So now color sketches. Once your tonal structure is set and it's working, then you can go on to color. And you'll see that if your tonal structure is working well, that you can throw all kinds of colors on top of it and it'll still work pretty well. If you're trying to, you know, do a color study on top of a bad tonal structure, you'll notice that there's still all of these problems and you're going in and like fiddling with different colors a bunch. That's, you know, that's an indication that you need to go back to your tonal compositions and get those working. Once they're working though, you can see how different you can change the communication of an image by choosing different colors. So on the left we have these, you know, very saturated, non-natural, non-local colors, and that tells a different story than the image on the right with more local color and a much sort of calmer color palette. This is you know, another thing that you can be doing in your color compositions. So now you can see kind of that part of his process for this image is laying color over top of a graphite underdrawing, but still the same process. If his underdrawing didn't work, then the colors on top of it wouldn't work either, and you'd end up with an image that doesn't make a lot of sense. And you can squint at this image a little bit and still see the major forms, still see the composition pretty well. And a lot of that is, you know, the high key white of this foreground figure's dress and the pants in the upper left and right corner. The contrast, the value contrast between the open sky behind, the tree kind of mass in the midground, and the darker branches in the foreground. Here's a color composition for Raft of the Medusa. So trying to figure out, you know, these kind of sickly greens and purples and blues, you know, this doesn't look like a happy image. Even if everybody on the ship were dancing and eating food or whatever, it still wouldn't look like a happy image because of the color palette. So that can do a lot of problem solving and you know, moving the narrative around. Once all of these things are complete, and if you're working with a client, you know, you'll get the go-ahead to take an image to final. If you're working for a personal project or something, then, you know, it's a little harder. You have to decide when this stuff is complete. But once you've done all of these things, you can go forward to final art. So, you know, now we can see which sketch Daniel's art director kind of collaborated with him on to go to final. And if we went all the way back to the original image, the sketch composition, you can see that, like, you know, the characters weren't wearing different clothes. There wasn't any writing on the cards or websites that are used as cards in here. The blocks, the texture, none of that stuff was there, but the composition was there. Here's the final for that Sambosma piece. The final for the other Sambosma piece. You can see like there was no indication of these sort of tassel-y charms that were tied to the tree. There wasn't really an indication of clothing folds, or there were a lot of, you know, these marks on the tree that are giving it some form that wasn't in a lot of the sketch studies and the compositions. And here's the final image for Theodore Jericho's Raft of the Medusa. You can see where all of those, you know, this figure here on the bottom right that's kind of, you know, their head and shoulders are down in the water. That was one of the sketch studies that we saw early on. Over on the left, the figure with the red hood kind of clutching this body, we saw that in a sketch study early on, but this is the final version of that. So that concludes my presentation on creating illustrations. Again, you're going to find people that work in different ways. That's fine. I strongly recommend that you try things this way and kind of adapt it to suit your needs. But I think you'll definitely find if you skip reference, if you put your, you know, you don't do sketch compositions before you go into final, that you're going to be doing a lot of backtracking to get your illustrations or your final images to work the way that you need them to. So that's it for that, and I will talk to you later.